Thus, the interpretation of an archive depends on how one looks at its contents. The 6 screenshots here represent the role that digital space played in the making of this exhibition. The materiality of documents and artifacts quickly became a matter of interest to us. Our visit to the archive took place digitally and left behind a footprint of its own. Screens became a way to communicate, to record and remember information, and substantiate our research. We received most of the information through a screen and translated it in a space which is mainly analog. Due to current regulations, the Bauhaus Foundation remains closed to the public. We thus invite you to discover our work as we translate it back into digital form. A Concrete for the Other Half is an exhibition curated by the Bauhaus Lab 2020. It takes as its point of departure the sulphur concrete block, an invention of the minimum cost housing group, a study program of the McGill University founded in the early 1970s. The exhibition unravels the different threads that emanate from the block. It reflects on questions of pedagogy and practice, poverty in human settlements, materiality in people, digital and archival research. Facing its own set of complexities, this exhibition, like the sulphur concrete block, is emblematic of its time. Alvaro Ortega, a Colombian architect and founder of the minimum cost housing group, inspired his students to do practical research. The group first experimented with different material composition and formwork of sulphur blocks, eventually settling on an interlocking design that would avoid wet mortar and speed up the construction process. The group also developed sulphur tiles, paving blocks, and sanitary fixtures. As sulphur was considered a simpler alternative to conventional building methods, the students produced instructions to explain the process for future self-builders. From experimentation to consultancy projects, the houses built by the group display the evolution of the function of the sulphur block over time. As most were demonstration projects, their documentation hints towards performance, emphasizing the process and experimental nature of the houses. To our knowledge, only Maison Le Sat remains, although heavily altered. One sentence from an interview, a couple of Google Maps searches, a page in a thesis or a book, retrace the fragmented story of construction. Thus, feasibility marked the success of the sulphur concrete block experiment. This question led us to research the afterlife of these demonstration projects. Yet, archives rarely represent the lived reality of the users' and inhabitants' experiences. In the case of the Roundhouse in Saddle Lake, we tried to fill in these gaps by getting in touch with members of the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. Today, we suspect that a cement foundation is all that remains of the Saddle Lake project. Sulphur is mined from volcanoes, extracted from underground deposits, or removed from oil and petroleum. When oil is left unrefined, the sulfur dioxide is released in fuel emissions and causes acid rain. Rising environmental concerns in the 1960s led to a demand for cleaner oil. Cleaner oil meant the availability of sulphur as a waste product. This waste material could thus be used to create low-cost building materials. As such, the minimum cost housing group experimented with it as an intermediate technology. Over time, research within the minimum cost housing group moved from hands-on experiments to fieldwork. It can be seen here in the publication How the Other Half Builds. The drawings in the publication tell a story of how space takes precedence over permanence. They illustrate how everyday activities shape the spaces in which we live and define priorities. Informal economies and actions that are difficult to fit in graphs are thus represented in drawings and inform the design practice. The minimum cost housing group was part of a complex network of organizations and actors dealing with development in architecture and urban planning. The diverse reading list drawn from their thesis bibliographies shows the effect it had on their practice. The role of the architect can be multiple and interdisciplinary: scientists, designers, historians, policymakers, mediators. All of these roles consider housing as an ever-changing process that requires interdisciplinary and ingenious thinking. Aside from the sulphur block, the group worked on a variety of projects in the 1970s. Designs such as atomization showers or plastic blocks revealed involvement with climate change, access to clean water, or emergency housing. While they answered the preoccupations of their time, they further influenced ideas and networks. For example, many students reapplied the interlocking design of the block, such as Beru's Nornia with plastic blocks, Ruth A. Etherington in Hawaii, or Bernard Lefebvre in Manila. There is no single definition of development. However, the outcome is defined to be improved living conditions. Discussions about poverty and economic progress have a 70-year history, with words such as Third World and underdevelopment entering the lexicon only after 1945. Development was implemented in purely economic policies in the 1970s, but evolved to have a more holistic scope in the 1980s. In the 1990s, development as a term faced criticism. By whose standard and how is someone considered to be poor? The history of development shows that it is diverse and multiscalar. It also involves a network of actors from the international to the individual level. To the others, to always be defined for what they're not. To be labeled as underdeveloped, as less development, as developing. To the South as the Third World. To be primitive, to be converted, to order and hierarchy of discourse, to the bold programs and ever-expanding technical knowledge, to the rescue from misery and primitiveness, to modernity, to scientific advances, to production, to more, to produce more, to more clothes, more food, more materials, to more mechanical power and more technology, to more to burn, to happiness, from scarcity to abundance, to erase the differences within the third world, to the third world as homogeneous whole, in need of the same development, to absences, to deficiencies, to abnormalities, to be rectified through development, to the expansion of the population in the South as a spiral out of control, to industrialist countries and economic growth as answers, to eventually reach the stage of high mass consumption, to formulate policy, to make statements, to implement rural and urban reforms, to operationalize growth strategies, and thus to gradually reshape the social world of underdevelopment, to the third world as object of intervention.